Man, I love Kagurabachi. I've been a fan since the first chapter came out, mostly because of the art. I think Hokazono is a great artist, but the story's been really picking up in my opinion in the last dozen or so chapters. Anyways, the chapter starts with Chihiro and Hirohiko, and we haven't seen them since I think chapter 54, I think. So we get to see them at the start of the chapter. Then before I move on, I want to talk about some of the eye flow in this first page again. If you look at this green circle, that's the attention point in that first top right panel. And then your eye is guided to the sword, the second attention point in that panel. And your eye is guided there through the bubbles, the cranes, like the paper cranes, and the sound effect. Points your eye there. Then if you look at this blue line, that sword basically just points all the way to the attention point in the bottom. It's really simple, but extremely effective, just guiding your eye exactly where it needs to be. And while we're looking at it, I reread the last couple of chapters. In chapter 54, we see that sword being flown in with the cranes, but so much has happened I completely forgot about it. So I saw this sword at the beginning of the chapter and I was very confused. So I had to reread the previous couple chapters. But yeah, we can see the sword in chapter 54 flying in near, I guess, the theater where they're at. The next page, we cut back to Mr. Samura in the temple. We get this really cool, I guess not full page spread, but large panel of Mr. Samura. I'm not 100% sure because it's kind of hard to tell with all the rubble in the background and the foreground, but I'm pretty sure it's this panel is a 1 point perspective with the vanishing point being where Mr. Samura is, and I marked it in yellow. Moving on, we get to see more of the carnage from this onslaught of attacks from Tobimune and Mr. Samura. I want to single it on this panel. I marked out the vanishing point. Nice little 1 point perspective with the walls and the broken, I guess, barrier or whatever. I'm forgetting railing. My goodness, I almost forgot the word for that. But yeah, the railing and the wall. That you can see the left side of that panel. Those slopes on the buildings also point to that vanishing point. Simple but really effective. It's a pretty good panel. But then moving on, we see the Makizumi ninjas reacting to Mr. Samura's return with Tobimune. There's some people saying, it's almost, or this amount, it's impossible, what just happened? And Mr. Samura, he's looking for the Hishaku member who can control the giant tree roots. You could see the roots in that previous panel with the Buddha and Mr. Samura. But yeah, moving on, we get a cool panel with the Hishaku member who's still unnamed. I don't know why he doesn't have a name yet. Because this is the third fight he's been in, but I guess he still doesn't have a name. But he's just sitting on this tree. I guess, branch. And the way he's posted up is really funny. But then we get this panel of Mr. Samura talking. And I like this panel a lot. You can see the blue line right here. It just points from Mr. Samura, who's the point of the number one point of interest in the panel. You go down his arm. You see the Makizumi ninja, and then you follow that, and then you see Hakuya and Uraha, and that leads you to the next panel, which is a close-up of them two. So it's just really good. We get some dialogue between Hakuya and Uraha, where Hakuya is saying, "Oh, I think I've got one more in me. I'll transport Kumayuri," and Kumayuri is Uraha's enchanted blade. Hakuya's like, "I got one more. I'll transport it to you." But then the female Makizumi ninja, she steps in, she's like, "Yo, you're tripping, you're clearly exhausted, you gotta rest. We'll move to the next fortress and treat you there, and then we'll get it." Then we go to the next panel. I like this panel a lot. And also, the way Hokazono uses solid blacks reminds me a lot of early One Piece. If you look at NES Lobby or stuff from that or earlier, especially Sanji or Zoro, he uses a lot of solid blacks just to fill in shapes, and Hokazono does the same thing. Just something I thought of. Yeah, we get some more dialogue, and Mr. Samura's, he repeats that hey, you guys are fired, by the way. And then we get a panel of Mr. Samura asking if everyone's alright, and I really like his face there, just the subtle nuance. Then it cuts to the next panel, which is insane. And Ryo Fura, 22 years old, guy who worked at the fortress, and it's just a gruesome panel, blood everywhere. There's a whole like it's not metal, sorry, wooden beam like stuck through his chest. It's just, I don't know, it's the detail's like really nice on this. It makes you like feel for this guy who you've barely seen and didn't know his name up until now. And there's a story about like how he sent all his money to his sister. Yeah, just, I think the nuance of war is a big like, it's a big subject, and will be this story. Very, I guess, like nuke-esque. Enchanted blades are nukes, and the fight is like an allegory for war. Not exactly though, but like I think you get the point. We get another really nice, well-drawn face of Mr. Samura. And then some more dialogue about how he didn't die in vain, like we have to protect the sword bearers. And Mr. Samura says, unfortunately, this is just the start. Now, given what happens later on in the chapter, I'm not sure what this means. Like, does this mean what I think it means? Or, man, this chapter is like, this chapter, I can't wait any longer for the next one. Like, this chapter blew my mind, like, by far, this chapter blew my mind more than any chapter this story has so far. But anyways, oh, also, I forgot to mention, look at this panel real quick, and look at the mouth on the Makizumi ninja I circled. It is just completely not where it's supposed to be. And that's not very typical of Hokuzono, so like, it like stuck out like a sore thumb to me at least. I noticed it immediately, I thought it was pretty funny. Well, it doesn't really matter though, I just thought it was funny. Anyways, moving on, we cut back over to Hirohiko and Chihiro and their little confrontation. And this whole time, Hiko, I'll just call him Hiko for short, Hiko is just taunting Chihiro the entire time. But before I move on to like their entire conversation, I want to point out this first page in the eye flow. As always, look at the blue line. It goes from Chihiro's face in the second panel. The angle of his face goes straight to his foot. His foot guides you to Hiko's face in the third panel. And then from there, the angle of his foot, his leg, the angle of his leg continues and goes straight down to Hiko and Chihiro in the bottom panel. And then there's Hiko's like arm on the left, which takes you straight to the close-up in the final panel. It's peak, honestly. And like the eye flow in Kagurabachi is why it's my like #1 recommendation right now for new manga readers. Because I think it's like, at least for shonen manga, it's like the easiest to read, honestly. Like the eye flow is just incredible. And the paneling's pretty good. And but the eye flow is exceptional, and it's consistently exceptional. Just everything flows together. Every panel flows like butter. It's just beautiful. But Hiko's kind of mocking Chihiro here. He says, right, you have to protect those heroes, huh? Or those heroes. And he said, this is why Yura, who's the leader of Yushaku, this is why Yura said you weren't ready. And Hiko's like, have you heard of school? Then we get two pretty cool panels. The first one's a 2-point perspective box but it's just pretty clean. Lots of solid blacks again for the school uniforms. And the second one I like even more. It's a close-up of the teacher's hand holding some chalk. 1-point perspective near like his middle finger. But yeah, that panel I really like. Just the shading and the details, I don't know. And the way the hand looks holding the chalk, I think is just, it's just something about it pleases my maybe like primitive monkey brain. But anyways, Hiko's saying that in school they teach that the sword bearers are all heroes, but he's kind of getting at it's a bit more complicated than that, which I think everyone kind of assumed. I mean, people who there's always two sides to war, but that leads us to an almost full-page spread of, I assume Tokyo, but some big city, and it's basically a 1-point perspective. I think there's a second vanishing point way off in the distance. I couldn't really tell. I'm not an expert at art yet, so I can't know for certain and sometimes. But one vanishing point is definitely like inside the speech bubble. You can see that with the street where the cars are going. It's clearly angled to where the speech bubble is. But Hiko's basically talking about the Shinichi and how, like, hey, you saw the Shinichi at the Rakuzaichi. And speaking of which, the Rakuzaichi was a phenomenal introductory arc, in my opinion. I might want to go back and do a whole video on that, but that's neither here nor there. And Chihiro's like, what are you getting at? And then there's some more internal dialogue about the Shinichi and how he doesn't actually know that much about it and how his dad was secretive. And he said, and one thing I find interesting is, it says, but when Kiora wielded it, I felt someone else inside of him. What if it wasn't the Shinichi itself that was out of control, but the Sword Master? And what Father was hiding was something much more crucial. So basically it's getting at the Sword Master is probably some kind of villain who, during the war, even though like the textbooks and school say he's a hero, he's really not. It's much more complicated. And then that's what Chihiro asks Hiko directly. And then the next page we get some internal dialogue of Chihiro saying, it's been such a crazy day, I can't even think, my brain's in total disarray, is what he's saying to himself. But then while this is happening, like, Hiko drops a giant bombshell. He says, at least that's what Mr. Samura thinks, when responding to whether the Sword Master isn't a hero. And Hiko says, that's why he made a pact with Yura 3 years ago. Like, come on, that, like, my brain about exploded when I read that for the first time. Because Mr. Samura working with the Hishaku, but Chihiro's like, well, it doesn't even matter if the Sword Master's a bad person. If we let him die, you guys will have the sword, and we can't let that happen. And then we get this cool panel from, like, down below them, in between the seats and the armrests. Really cool panel, 2-point perspective. The first one vanishing point is, like, almost, like, in between the two of their faces. And then another one's way off to the right. Like, you can see the armrests slightly are at different angles. And, like, there definitely is a second vanishing point, but it's much more zoomed out. Or, sorry, zoomed in, I mean. And it's way off the page. But I really like this panel. Just seeing them through all the armrests. Just like, Hokazono knows how to curate, like, a vibe, I feel. Like, it's a very vibe-heavy shonen. Like, maybe kind of like Bleach. Bleach is another shonen I think is also very vibe-heavy. It kind of reminds me of that in a lot of ways. I mean, come on, magical swords, set on Earth. Well, Bleach is kind of set on Earth, but you get what I'm saying. The vibes are very similar, I feel. And then Hiko says, you know what Samura said, the contracted sword bearers should die. And Chihiro's like, can't even believe it. Then there's a little flashback of something that Mr. Samura said. And Chihiro's like stumbling on his words. And these three panels are awesome. Like, the two of their eyes, they're so, like, rigid and, like, not rigid, but, like, squiggly and unconfined. I really like this section of the chapter. Like, these three panels are incredible. And Hiro Hiko is the ultimate troll. He's just saying, he's just trying to, like, mess with Chihiro, and he just wants to fight. He's like, look, don't think about it too hard. We just have to fight each other to the death, right? Man, I really like Hirohiko. He's a funny character. Like, really edgy, but he's just hilarious. I think it works for that kind of villain. I mean, it wouldn't work if he was like the head honcho, but as like a side villain, I think he's a great character. And we see the blade I mentioned earlier that we saw in chapter 54, and we see it flying somewhere in the sky. The next page, boom, slams down the sword. We get a nice 1-point perspective. I guess, actually, it's 2-point perspective, but again, Hokazono likes to do this a lot, where like one of the vanishing points is in the panel and another one's off in the distance. Like, you can see the lines on the floor on the panel where the sword drops in. The lines on the floor, the horizontal ones, they are at different angles. So there definitely is a vanishing point somewhere in the distance. No, there's another one. There's a vanishing point a little bit on the sword. There's a vanishing point like where the scabbard of the sword meets the seats of the theater is basically what I'm trying to say. So cool panel. They both react to the sword. Hirohiko, he grabs his severed arm, which we saw earlier in the chapter sitting next to him. He grabs it with his teeth and throws it at Chihiro as a distraction. I mean, like, how can you hate this villain, bro? Ultimate troll, bro. He uses his own severed arm as a fighting tool. I'm a big Hirohiko fan, but we get we see a bunch of things fly through the window. I assume they're the paper cranes, or maybe not. Maybe just they look like crystals almost. I don't know what else they'd be. I assume they're the paper cranes, but you can't really tell. And there's a cool 1-point perspective of Chihiro dodging the cranes. The next page, 2 vertical panels. Hogazono really likes these vertical page layouts. Like, he does it once almost every chapter, basically, where it's panels, like 2 panels that stretch all the way down with like maybe another panel inside. He really likes it, and like the paneling's awesome. And this page is just gorgeous. And we see on the right side the cranes, and in text Kume-yuri. We see Chihiro's reaction, and on the left side we see Hiko grabbing Kume-yuri with his mouth and like unsheathing it. Also, I'm gonna point out the eyes on this page are way different than the eyes earlier. The eyes on this page are like soulful, joyful, whatever you want to use. Like, they're more emotive, like happy, joyful, empathizable eyes, I guess, compared to the serial killer ones that both of them had earlier. And that goes for Hirohiko too. Like, his pupils are way larger than they've been the rest of the chapter in this panel. But great page. Then we go to the second to last page of the chapter, full page spread. I mean, this page is just gorgeous. Where he's grabbing Kume-yuri and he's unsheathing it. And there's these Japanese performers that are floating out of the sword, and they're faceless. They look kind of creepy, honestly. And they also look like the goldfish that Chihiro uses. They don't really have legs, they just have like cloaks, which kind of look like the goldfish. But if you look at the red lines here, you can see one vanishing point to the left off the screen. And you can see all the lines I drew that go the same angle. They all meet at this vanishing point. I did the same thing for the right side, but you can see like they do angle towards some vanishing point, but it's way off in the distance. So like, yeah, neither of the vanishing points are on the page for this panel. It's a very zoomed in perspective, but it looks gorgeous. He's on the stage, and then go to the last page, and there's a little panel of Uraha, and man, if Uraha, like, I just can't even fathom what's going on. But the last panel of the chapter, I love. I love this last panel. Like, Chihiro's face in this is just, he looks so distraught. Once again, Hokuzono is the GOAT at drawing like subtle, nuanced faces. Because it's not like Chihiro's face, it's not like an exaggerated shock or exaggerated sadness. It's all the faces he draws are typically really subtle. You can understand them so well. And that also makes the more overtly expressive faces more impactful. But yeah, that's the chapter, and there's so much to unpack. Like, if Mr. Samura actually killed Uraha, that'd be crazy. That'd blow my mind. And that'd completely change what I'd expect from the story going forward. But we already have that gruesome death earlier in the chapter. So I feel like Hokuzono is definitely trying to set up for the story to get a lot darker, a lot more morally gray for sure. But yeah, I mean, Kume-yuri is Uraha's sword. Hakuri mentioned it earlier in the chapter. And if Hirohiko is using Kume-yuri, the assumption is that Uraha is dead. Which, I don't know how to feel about that. Did Mr. Samura kill him? Is he actually dead? There's so many more questions that this chapter raised, and it's like my mind, like, I did not expect this at all. I did not expect like a potential backstabber for Mr. Samura. It might be, there's no way Samura killed Uraha. my guess is that he can somehow use the sword with Uraha alive, but that's probably just me coping because I really like Uraha. But honestly, who's to say? We'll have to wait till I think next week. I don't think there's a break, but man, I'm really excited to see the next chapter. It'll be really interesting to see this fight. I don't think next chapter is going to even answer what happened to Uraha, if anything. I think the whole next chapter is going to be a fight between Chihiro and Hirohiko. I think that's going to be the entire chapter, but that's just my guess. I mean, who knows though. But yeah, that's the chapter. Honestly, way more questions than answers, but that's honestly a good thing though, because it keeps us engaged, keeps the readers engaged, gives us more to want. Yeah, just overall phenomenal chapter. Peace out.